Chapter 8. When she awoke a couple of hours later, it was dusk. Mandy had been dreaming. She felt depressed and as tired as when she had gone to rest. She lay in bed listening to the sounds of the house. They were comforting sounds, soothing and peaceful. Anne speaking quietly to Samson, Bill's footsteps going to his study, a door closing, music coming faintly from the radio in the kitchen. Mandy wished she were truly a part of it all. She got up slowly and wandered to the window. It was still snowing and almost dark. An owl flew evenly across the garden and disappeared into the night. Her thoughts turned to little Chip. She wondered if he were safe and tucked warmly away somewhere out there in the woods. The familiar aching sadness suddenly gripped her as she gazed out at the silent world. It would be cold in the cottage. The garden would be white and desolate. There was no one to take care of it now. She shuddered. How long would it be before she was returned to the orphanage? What would she do with herself when she got back? School was probably over until after the holidays. Would she go to the cottage? Matron would surely forbid it. Did she truly want to see it again? She wasn't sure. It held so many unpleasant memories, but there had been pleasant ones before the nightmare. She remembered the lovely summer and the thrill of growing her beautiful flowers and the peaceful, quiet days that were all her own. Yet now, as she looked back on them, they seemed to have been lonely days too. She hadn't thought so at the time. Mandy supposed it was some sort of comparison with being in Cranton House. The warmth and comfort she had received from Bill and Anne was like nothing she had ever known before. She was going to miss them desperately. Mandy turned away from the window. She climbed into bed again and huddled beneath the covers. Her heart was throbbing with emotion and anxiety. It was an effort not to cry. There was a light tap on the door. Mandy, are you awake? It was Bill. He came into the room and quietly switched on her bedside light. Anne wondered if you wanted supper downstairs or on a tray up here. He noticed her sad and tear-stained face. He sat down on the bed beside her and put a hand on her brow. Mandy spoke quickly. Oh, Bill, I think I'd rather stay up here. Do you mind? She brushed her eyes. Fine, I'll tell Anne. But he made no move to go. Presently he said, What have you been thinking about? Looks to me like you've been having a serious thought or two. His voice was light and easy. Not really. I was thinking about the orphanage and last summer. What about last summer? Oh, you know, the shell cottage and the garden. Her voice wavered. And everything. You did a marvelous job on the little garden, Mandy. Did you see it? She was surprised. I certainly did, Bill smiled. Didn't you get my notes? Why? Mandy's eyes opened wide. She held her breath for the longest moment. Her thoughts went tumbling and spinning in all directions. You mean it was you who left? Yes, Mandy. I'm afraid I'm the culprit. I left you the messages. Bill laughed as he saw her incredulous expression. I left the chrysanthemum plant too. Did you get that? Oh, and I had to clear the garden. And mend the gate? Mandy whispered. Yes, that as well. I've been meaning to tell you, Manders, but I wanted to wait till you were better. But when did you see me? I was riding around the estate when we first moved in. I saw you working in the garden. I knew you must be from the orphanage, so I didn't disturb you. You seemed to be so occupied with it all and busy. I didn't want to interrupt. Maybe you weren't supposed to be there. Perhaps you wouldn't have come back if I had surprised you. It would have spoiled your fun. Mandy stared at Bill. She was so stunned she hardly understood what he was saying. Bill continued, I got the idea of leaving you a note from time to time. I had a thought that you might like the mystery of it. It was a silly game, really. I realized that almost immediately. I was going to come to visit you and explain the next time I was near the cottage, but you beat me to it. You got sick and came to visit me instead. Mandy shook her head in bewilderment. She was trying to put her thoughts into some sort of order. It was a painful shock to realize that there was probably no such person as the handsome prince that she had imagined. He was just a fantasy. An admirer was just an ordinary human being. This kind, big, somewhat imposing man, and he had sought to amuse her with a game. She grasped for some meaning. But what made you clear the garden? Why did you do it? Mandy, I had to. There are other cottages on the estate, you know. They were all in a bad way. I needed to see what I had, so I just sent a tractor in to clear everything. Of course, I paid a bit more attention to the shell cottage. He smiled. Mandy felt an emotion rising within her, which she couldn't understand. She had a sudden desire to weep. She turned her head away from the light and looked toward the window. The white flakes were still falling through the black night, brushing gently on the grass. Tears rolled down her cheeks onto the pillow. What is it, Mandy? Bill took her hand. Can you tell me? She moved her head, and the sobs shook her small frame. Bill waited. Won't you try to tell me? There was a long pause as she silently fought to gain control. And then, in a small, lost voice, she whispered one word. Snow. Mandy had a fever the following morning. Her temperature went soaring up, though she was not nearly as ill as she had been the night of the storm. She lay in bed feeling very sick indeed. Dr. Matthews hurried over to Cranton House earlier than usual. Anne had telephoned him the minute she discovered Mandy's condition. He teased Mandy gently. Now, my dear young lady, don't tell me you're going to get sick again. We can't have that. After a careful examination, he announced that she was suffering a small relapse. Nothing too serious, he told Anne. We'll just have to retrace our steps a little. That's all. He turned to Mandy. I'm afraid it's back to bed with you for a while, Mandy. You've just been coming along a little too fast. Recovering from these illnesses takes time. He patted her hand. I'll come by this evening. You do as this good lady tells you, and you'll be on your feet again in no time. Mandy felt reassured. Truthfully, she was quite glad to be confined to bed again. She was still emotionally confused from her talk with Bill the night before, and bed seemed to be the safest and most peaceful place right now. She slept a great deal, and when she wasn't sleeping, she lay listlessly, staring out of the window at the snow-covered garden. Jonathan visited her in the late afternoon. Seeing Mandy's wan face and knowing that she was ill again seemed to scare him a little. He didn't stay with her long. Having confirmed for himself that she was still alive, he left her in Anne's capable hands and went about his business. When Dr. Matthews returned in the evening, he brought Matron Bridie with him. Mandy had no wish to see Matron or to be reminded of the orphanage. She would be returning there soon enough. She felt petulant at what she took to be Matron's interference. Matron requested that she be left alone with Mandy to discuss something important. Was she going to deliver the long-awaited lecture, or was she going to say it was time to pick up the threads of her old life again? Mandy sank down into the warmth of the bed covers and wished she didn't have to hear anything at all. She stared fixedly ahead as Matron drew up a chair and sat beside her. Mandy, I have an invitation for you from the Fitzgeralds. I wanted to speak to you alone to find out your thoughts on the matter before I get back to them. They'd very much like to have you spend Christmas here with them at Canton House. Do you think you might like to do that? Mandy could not believe her ears. She turned her head slowly and stared at Matron. Relief and happiness washed over her in a great wave. She was so thrilled that for a moment she couldn't think of anything to say. Matron smiled as she looked at Mandy's joyous face. Well, well, I see that you would like it very much indeed. I'm delighted. In that case, I'll tell Mr. and Mrs. Fitzgerald that you may stay, and that I shall collect you the day after Christmas, say around noon. How does that suit you? Mandy found her voice. She spoke with